Hello, hello. All right, very excited to be here. Always nice to visit Berkeley, even though I did my PhD and was a professor at Stanford. But at the graduate level, there's just lots of love in the research world. I want to talk to you today about search APIs for accurate answers and agents. But before we dive into the details of how we can actually make these kinds of agents accurate, I want to maybe zoom out for a little bit and talk about what I would call anthropic bounds, which are pretty much everywhere in AI. And what do I mean by this? A lot of the AI training data sets, the evaluations, the benchmarks, even the tasks that we give AI are all human defined, right? So you look at all these different things like image classification, as one of the authors of the ImageNet paper too. You look at reasoning and Stanford question answering and superclude like language understanding. Those are all tasks and data sets defined by humans. So when we think about sort of where AI can go long term over the next few years, well, if that's how we evaluate it, then obviously the most you can get to is just slightly above an average human annotator, right? Which isn't as exciting. It'll be very hard for us to get to something like superintelligence that is even beyond not just a single human, but like super humanity intelligence. And even some of the amazing things like Chatbot Arena that are certainly another better level up there, we are still defining these ELO scores based on human preferences, right? And again, it's going to be very hard to create superhuman intelligence. Now, what would be a path to be better than humans on a lot of different things? I think that is through simulations, and anything you can simulate and or verify, you can actually get to superhuman capabilities. And in a very concrete way at u.com, where we're seeing is that search and especially browsers are going to be one of those ways that agents can actually access a simulation. In some ways, you can think of the browser as a projection from the real world into actionable online activities. And maybe even now going one level below, we can think of almost all the technologies that we've built, mobile phones, computers, GPUs, browsers, search engines, all of those things are going to be ultimately infrastructure layers for superintelligence and various AGI and standard AI before that. And so what that means is we got to make sure those infrastructure layers, sometimes you just have to have a certain number of flops with the GPUs, but you also want them to be very accurate. And so now we get into sort of that last mile problem for agents. This was a paper published by some folks from Penn State and Salesforce Research evaluating answer engines. And what a lot of folks find is that while we have ML systems and AI systems that are very accurate sort of in a one-step kind of shot, that if you have a flow, and agents usually have to take multiple actions, right? If each of those steps is 95% accurate, well, if you're 95 to the power of 30, they'll be only accurate like 1/5 of the time for the entire workflow. And that is something that we're seeing. And here you can kind of see an evaluation of these first iterations of answer engines in 2024 still, where they compared u.com and a few others. And you can see that almost none of us were perfect, right? Though u.com was the best and most accurate across all of these. But there's still too many uncited sources, unsupported statements, one-sided answers, and things like that. Only a few, like u.com, were able to at least not give overconfident answers when we shouldn't really be confident. And this is something that was kind of okay for consumer adoption, but now that we're looking into enterprise, and ultimately I think almost all of these companies will converge into what is, I think, the killer app, no pun intended, of LLMs, and that is enterprise productivity. A lot of times, consumer search, people ask actually very simple kinds of questions to a normal search engine, like what's the score of the game, what's the weather tomorrow, what's the price of the stock? And there's not much you can do to be 10x better on the majority of such simple questions. But for the really complex things, that's where we actually can do much, much better with these more complex LLM-based systems, and that those complex questions are in enterprise productivity. So now, what do you do to actually make those agents more accurate? You have to give them, as a step one, a very, very accurate search backend. And it turns out that is a hard enough problem that we've now been working on for years, but it's starting to pay off. And it's actually now our biggest line of business is actually enabling all the other LLMs to be up to date, to have real-time citations about things that are happening in the world, and not just have accurate content, but also accurate citations. And so you might ask, is it still actually possible for a smaller company like U.com, not tiny, but also not nearly as big as OpenAI, to beat some of these larger folks? And I think a similar question you might ask if you're a Berkeley PhD student or you work in other small companies. And the interesting thing is that the answer is yes. You just have to focus on a particular kind of use case. So in this case, we've had deep research agents. We used to call them just modes, like research modes, but then realized at some point everyone is calling these things agents because they are taking actions, but the actions that they take are not necessarily clicking in a browser. And that's where we differentiate between knowledge and action agents, right? Knowledge agents, they have a few actions like knowing when to search and searching more deeply, and programming. And it turns out, software ate the world, so programming obviously is a very, very powerful action. And so what we did here is we focused on just very exhaustive, long, carefully put together research reports, like 30 pages with 500 different sources and things like that. And then we actually asked the OpenAI O3 model to be the judge of which of the research reports are better, those of ARI, our Advanced Research and Insights modes of U.com, or that of OpenAI's Deep Research mode. And according to the OpenAI model, the ARI report does beat the OpenAI outputs of deep research. And so initially I was somewhat surprised actually that we're that good. And of course, we don't want to rely on just a data set that we published. So we also ran this on the Frames benchmark, a benchmark created by Harvard, Meta, and DeepMind that basically evaluates fact retrieval and reasoning across multiple constraints and then trying to accurately synthesize multiple different steps. And so even on that benchmark, which you can run yourself, we can actually and have beaten GPT-4o models with search and various other open source models and other smaller startups. And so what that means is you can really do better if you focus and you just spend a lot more energy and cycles and also compute and tokens on a particular kind of task. You go deeper in terms of, in our case, numbers of citations, unique web pages, unique domains, to then be more likely to give you accurate research reports. And so one thing that is, I think, super important and I think overlooked a lot, especially in enterprise applications, is when people say, oh, we're the most accurate and so on. It's just kind of marketing, blah, blah. But as a former professor, I feel like I couldn't stand up here and tell you like we're the actually most accurate if we didn't have an open source benchmark. And so you can actually go on GitHub and download and rerun and evaluate and test and compare any other deep research model and know that all the numbers actually check out. And so, yeah, we're seeing, similar to the previous speakers, a lot of folks incorporating these kinds of new workflows and getting massive speed-up increases in journalistic processes, but also in healthcare and insurance companies and hedge funds and so on. And so I won't go into too many details, but we can basically think about all the different consumer and enterprise software applications that have been built over the last few years. And in almost all cases, they can become a new infrastructure layer for these agents that are now coming out. Everyone can benefit from having an LLM, for instance, access live news, because no one can train an LLM yet. Every 5–10 minutes, something happens in the world. And so really would love to work with more of you, both as customers, but if you want to build these kinds of systems, also love for you to join us. Thank you.